So we have a really special program for you today. It's a debate about the issue of gun control. Before we get started, I just wanted to kind of poll the audience and ask a question. If you yourself or someone in your family has been the victim of gun violence, or someone in your family knows someone who's been a victim of gun violence or has died by suicide by gun, so a show of hands. So it pretty much affects everybody in our country. And the thing about gun control that makes it such a tough issue, and we all know this, the right to have a gun is guaranteed by our Constitution. Very few other things are guaranteed, freedom of the press, but the right to carry a gun in this country is guaranteed by our forefathers. We have more than 300 million guns in this country. So when you think about that, the issue isn't whether we're going to ban guns. The issue is, how do we regulate guns in a way that makes sense for everyone involved? And I've often advocated, and I've done this on the air on King 5, we need to take this issue back from the fringes, because if we argue it at the fringes, we're never going to get anything done. We're not going to pass anything that's sensible, and both sides are going to be yelling at each other, and we're not going to solve anything at the end of today. I'm really excited today because I'm excited to learn from these two gentlemen, to learn what we can do to bring us all closer to sensible ideas on the issue of gun control. Before we go further, thank you, Dave Endicott, for putting today's program together and all your organization. Let's give Dave a round of applause for that. Thank you. So our program today features two people you know well, and it also features you. I'll get to that in just a minute. Arguing for more gun control is retired General Peter Chiarelli, a member of this Rotary Club, who is known for his efforts to reduce the high rate of suicide among veterans. Arguing against more gun control is radio show host John Carlson, a former candidate for governor, co-founder of the Washington Policy Center, who has written about ways to reduce gun violence that don't diminish gun rights. So again, our goal is to provide all of you with information that maybe you haven't heard or considered before. Both of them summarize their arguments in last Friday's Totem. When we talk about gun control, we're talking about a lot of different things. It's like, how do you solve hunger? How do you bring about world peace? When you talk about gun control, there are lots and lots of sub-issues under that category. Magazine size, waiting period, safe storage, accessories like bump stocks. So there are lots and lots of ways to bring about quote-unquote gun control. Time is going to be limited today. We will implement the Seattle Rotary debate format, which was developed several years ago by the program committee. This debate features you, members of Seattle 4, and our guests today. So our speakers will take about 4 to 5 minutes to each lay out their position to begin with. Then we're going to break for some table talk, during which time we're going to have each table come up with one question. If you have to vote, that's cool. If you feel passionately about your question, get passionate about it and demand that everyone vote your way. But every table is going to be able to pose a question, and we'll try to get to the whole room. We'll get to as many tables as we can. So during table talk, think about that one question that you want to pose to these guys to help us all better understand gun control. So then we'll reconvene and we'll rove the room. I'll do my best Phil Donahue for you older people in the room. You know who Phil Donahue is. Taylor, you don't know who that is. I'll explain later. I'm going to go out. And at the end, we're going to have them summarize things at the end. So to begin with, General, I'd like you to start with 4 to 5 minutes, your opening statement, John, and then in reverse order at the very end. So please give a warm welcome to both John Carlson and General Peter Chiarelli.
I was at the Share Show with my wife in New York City 2 weeks ago, and at intermission, and you can imagine where they broke the show just after she broke up with Sonny. Lady next to me poked me in the ribs and said, did she really have somebody named Sonny that she used to sing with? And I said, man, I feel really, really old. I've been around guns all my life. I was told by the program chairs to put together something that was new and an interesting argument on how I would possibly talk about what I think is the need for sensible gun regulation. And I struggled with that for 2 or 3 days before I went back and looked at something I remembered when I was at the Graduate School of Public Affairs, a piece that was written by U.S. Supreme Court Justice Warren Burger. And I'm going to just go ahead and read that, because I think it, to me, is the best argument I've heard that puts the Second Amendment in context, the context that I believe that it should be put in. The Second Amendment of the U.S. Constitution guarantees a right of the people to bear arms. However, the meaning of this clause cannot be understood apart from the purpose, the setting, and the objectives of the draftsman. At the time of the Bill of Rights, people were apprehensive about the new national government and what it presented to them. And this helps explain the language and the purpose of the Second Amendment. It guarantees a well-regulated militia, being necessary to the security of a free state. The right of people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. The need for a state militia was the predicate of the right guarantee, so as to protect the security of the state. Today, of course, the state militia serves a different purpose. A huge national defense establishment has assumed the role of the militia 200 years ago. Americans have a right to defend their homes, and nothing should undermine this right. Nor does anyone question that the Constitution protects the rights of hunters to own and keep sporting guns for hunting more than anyone would challenge the right to own and keep fishing rods and other equipment for fishing. Neither does anyone question the right of citizens to keep and own an automobile. Yet there is not strong interest by the citizenry in questioning the power of the state to regulate the purchase or the transfer of such vehicle and the right to license the vehicle and the driver with reasonable standards. It is even more desirable for the state to have a reasonable regulation for the ownership and use of a firearm in an effort to stop needless homicidal carnage. That to me encapsulates more than any words that I could put together my belief of what the Second Amendment means to us and the kinds of regulations and laws that we should look to control what the Chief Justice so rightly said is homicidal carnage. Thank you.
All right, John.
Well, I think if I'm hearing Justice Burger correctly, is that the Second Amendment is not a right, because you need a license to drive on a public road, right? The government gives you the license. You have to earn the license. And you have to get a license to fish. You need the government's permission to fish. So I think what Chief Justice Burger was saying way back when is that there is no individual right. And that would put Chief Justice Burger on the minority of the Heller decision, which declared that you have a constitutional right to own a firearm. That it's an individual right, just like the right to worship, the right to speak freely, the right to be secure in your home from unreasonable search and seizure. These are individual rights spelled out in the Bill of Rights. So I would not only have to disagree with Chief Justice Burger, but happily I've got Antonin Scalia and a court majority on my side on that one. I want to take another poll, if I can, if that's all right, Mark, and that is, this is going to be another show of hands poll about the association of guns and crime. How many people here this afternoon believe that more guns in society means more crime in society, more violence? And how many people here, correspondingly, believe that there is no correlation between guns and crime? Okay, most people believe there is a link. Here are the numbers, very surprising. In 1993, since 1993, 25 years, the number of guns in society has increased 50%. There are 50% more guns in society today than there was 25 years ago for a variety of reasons. And as Mark was saying, and the Washington Post backs him up, there are now more guns than people in America. During that same period of time, did crime go up 50%? No. Did it go up 20%? No. Did it stay even? No. In the last 25 years, since 1993, violent crime, including gun crime, plummeted 50%. In other words, during the same period of time where gun ownership soared in America, crime went down. Now-
Except from 2014 forward,
Right.
crime has gone up.
Right, and that's what we're going to get into in a moment. So what accounts for that drastic fall off? What accounts for the fall off is not so much guns, but how we treat people who criminally misuse them. There are the pioneering police methods used in New York City by Chief Bratton and Mayor Giuliani, and then over here on the West Coast, a change in how we sentenced violent criminals, particularly those who are repeat offenders. We had the first 3 strikes you're out law in America. And so with the uptick that Pete correctly points out we've seen in the last couple of years, particularly in cities like Chicago and Baltimore, what can we do to once again bring crime down? And since I think my 4 minutes is coming up real quickly, that's what I want to get into during the Q&A session, not just as regards criminal violence, street crime, but also as regards mass shootings and the tragedy of suicide, because 2 out of every 3 people who lose their life to gunfire in this country commit suicide. They're not lost to murder or accidents, they are lost to suicide. By the way, General Chiarelli has done some great work in trying to address this issue, which again we'll get into in a few minutes.
All right, thanks you two. Okay, now it's time for table talk. I'll kind of poll you guys in a few minutes. Try to come up with your questions as quickly as possible, but talk among yourselves and we'll reconvene in a few minutes. Thanks. Okay, how's everybody doing? Do you guys need some more time or are you pretty good? Good? Okay. Do you guys need more time or are you good? Good? Okay, let's launch in. Let's start here. Okay, if I could have your attention, please, you guys. Let's start at this table. Who's your designated question asker? Okay, let's listen up. And General and John, let's try to move through these as quickly as possible. I know we have a short amount of time to get through everything. But first question.
Yeah, the question that we came up with was, John very astutely said that crime in the last 25 years has basically, well, let's not get into that, but I guess the point we want to get into is there has been an increase in violent mass shootings in the last 25 years. So we all see that increase. A, is there an increase in the last 25 years? B, is there a way to navigate the Second Amendment and the Constitution to control for violent mass shootings?
Yeah, I think last year we set a record nationally for mass shootings in America, so I think that the numbers do bear that out. John, why don't you just start, and then the General next.
Well, and that is one of the real conundrums, is that while violent crime and gun violence was going down overall, the number of people who were wounded and killed in mass shootings has been going up. And there's a number of strategies to address this. I think one of them has got to be, we need to make it easier to identify people who, because of mental illness, should not be able to obtain a firearm and deny them the ability to access one. Now, that's not going to stop all mass shootings, because
And how are you going to make that determination? Who are you going to determine is mentally ill enough that you're going to deny them the right based on the Second Amendment,
Right.
which you believe in so much that you're going to deny them ownership of a gun?
you have to set a standard, and this is, I called for this in an article I wrote earlier this year in the Wall Street Journal. I believe there should be a presidential commission that sets standards by which, if someone is on the other side of that line, that they're not able to purchase a firearm. We have that standard in place for people who commit felonies. I think we need to delineate that standard, and it's not going to be easy to get there, because when you're talking about a constitutional right, mitigating a constitutional right, that's a minefield, and it's not easy to get to.
And that's why it's always proposed. It's proposed because people know how hard it's going to be and what few people would be denied access to a weapon. Listen, mental illness is something I know a little bit about, and I will tell you, to determine whether someone's at risk or mentally ill enough that you're going to deny them their Second Amendment rights is an impossibility with the diagnostics we have today. This isn't like going in and seeing whether you have a tumor or whether you've got a temperature. This is done in ways that we do not have the kind of diagnostics we need to make the definitive kinds of calls you're talking about. That's why this goes, as you said, Mark, to the extremes every time. We've got to look at it in totality and ask, why is it that 92% of Americans want sensible gun control, sensible gun laws, yet we can't get there? And that's 89% of conservatives want that. Yet we still have loopholes in our gun laws.
So what would you do?
I'd close them.
Specifically?
I would look at it across the board.
Specifically?
First of all, I would require background checks for all gun purchases.
All right.
You wouldn't be able to go to a gun show because it's not in a store and just buy a gun. Now, the different states have different rules, but across the country, they are not the same. You're 25 times more likely to die from gun violence in the United States than any other country. 25 times. Yet we're talking about criminal rates with guns? That's silly. Look at that statistic, 25 times more likely.
So let me jump in with something. Today, I could go buy an AR-15, I could buy a 100-round magazine, and I could buy a bump stock. All of it legal, and I could go do what the guy did in Las Vegas. Essentially, an automatic machine gun that I bought the components for legally. Why is that? I mean, if we started to ban bump stocks, reduce magazine size, wouldn't that minimize some of the carnage in this country?
Ensure background checks?
Well, background checks I have no problem with. I think Pete and I are going to meet in the middle on that one. And in terms of having protection orders, emergency protection orders, I think that makes sense as well.
But what about bump stocks?
On the issue,
what about
well,
100-round
I think
magazines?
Bump stocks.
That's not self-protection.
Right. Bump stocks, to me, are just a workaround federal law prohibiting automatic weapons. So I called for a ban on bump stocks as well because, again, the only reason they exist is to mimic an automatic weapon. Automatic
Okay, we
weapons
have
are
our
illegal.
first point of agreement. Both sides want to ban bump stocks. So call your member of Congress and say, get off your can and ban bump stocks. We can, in 100-round magazines. I mean, I covered the mass shooting at Fairchild Air Force Base when I was a young reporter. A mentally ill airman had a 100-round magazine on an AR-15, and thank God an MP dropped him with a 9mm pistol. But that's the kind of stuff I think people, when they say we want sensible gun reform, John, don't you think it's sensible that we shouldn't be able to buy a 100-round magazine?
Well, at that point, then, where do you set the limit? 10, 20, 30?
Right.
It's the same thing we do in the military.
People will just buy.
The same thing we do in
Yeah.
the military. I never had anything more than a 21-round magazine. And I don't see, and I was in combat. For criminy sakes, why you need that in our cities today is beyond me.
Okay, here we go. Next question from the table.
Two things. One, it's ironic that The Onion has the quote, that's become a hallmark of this. No way to prevent this, says the only nation where this regularly happens, from a satire site. Our quick question is this. In Australia, after a tragedy, they did take tangible steps to reduce the amount of guns throughout society. Putting the constitutional argument aside, what can we learn from that interesting experiment in Australia? What's the result of that?
All right, General, start out, please.
Well, I think you can. I think you can learn that sensible measures taken can have tremendous impact. And all you have to look is the rate of violence and the rate of gun violence in states that have passed sensible regulations on the sale of guns. I ask you, sir, to look at all the states. Look at all the states that have, and quite frankly, Washington State is a leader. Washington State is a leader. But until you're willing to do that, I think Mark was so right. We are walking on the fringes right now. You can point to me, Chicago. I can point to you someplace else. Look at it across the states. Look at each one of the states and look at the rate of gun violence in states that have passed sensible regulations.
Well,
no one, including Justice Berger, said the Second Amendment is not important. No one. And that was not Berger's argument. I take great exception with that. He was saying is if that we can regulate vehicles, if we can ensure that people who get behind the wheel are both registered and capable of driving a vehicle, shouldn't we do the same with a firearm? Shouldn't we not do the same when 92% of Americans feel that we should? There's a problem here, and it's not that we don't know what to do. It's the fact that we're not doing it.
Okay, back to the original question. John, what can we learn from Australia?
In Australia, in particular, not very much, because there was that one terrible mass shooting, and they passed a buyback program. And then after it was in place for a while, crime began to go back up. But the issue I want to get to, someone mentioned Chicago. The problem we have in this country right now is that the overwhelming percentage of guns that are used to commit crimes are illegally obtained. In Chicago, 97% of the guns used in crime were not lawfully purchased. America generally, 2004 study, about 90% of weapons are not legally obtained. What we need to do in this country is to stigmatize the theft and the possession of illegal guns. If someone who stole a firearm received an automatic 4-year prison term, and they don't get anywhere close to that anymore, there'd be a whole lot fewer illegal guns on the street. Yes, there's the I-5 corridor, and there'll be a black market in guns anywhere there's a freeway system. But by and large, 1.2 million guns were stolen out of people's homes or vehicles in a 4-year period, 2012 to 2016. And the bottom line is, if you want a safer society, we need to hammer people who steal guns, who illegally purchase guns, who illegally possess them after losing their right to do so. And then we will be able to see that, as Pete was mentioning, we have an uptick in violence again. That's where we will see those numbers reverse. You're not going to get there by simply passing safe storage legislation or a limit on clips to 10 rounds, as Bob Ferguson wants. You've got to go after the people who are making the problem worse, and those are people who steal guns or who sell stolen guns or illegally possess them.
Okay, next question.
And those people are probably mentally ill because it is so easy to get a legally bought weapon in this country. Why would anyone steal one?
Okay, next question.
Yes, my question was, I was in the United States Marine Corps, and I understand from talk that they say more veterans are more likely to do this than other people in the general population. Is that correct?
I didn't understand.
Are you talking suicide?
Or misuse of guns? Suicide or misuse of guns?
The suicide rate in the United States Army doubled in 5 years after 2001. By 2008, we equaled the suicide rate in the civilian population, demographically corrected for our young age. But I will tell you that the number one way of committing suicide for a male in the United States Armed Forces is with the use of a gun. In the Army, we had 162 in 2012, and 90% of the males committed suicide by shooting themselves. Females don't. When females commit suicide, they don't shoot themselves. They normally get in a hot bathtub or take too much medicine, but they don't like to defile their body.
You know, the numbers are even worse here in Washington. About 3/4 of the deaths by gunfire here in Washington are by suicide. And there is a wonderful organization, well, there's several, but one in particular I want to point attention to is the Safer Homes Coalition, which is actually kind of a joint project of gun stores, gun rights groups, and the University of Washington School of Social Work. Now that's an interesting coalition. And it's all about reaching people who are thought to be in danger of taking their own life.
John, what's the name of the website, do you think?
Safer Homes Coalition.
Okay, let's leave it there. That's a good tip.
right.
Next question.
Hi, thank you, John and Pete, for coming today, and Mark for facilitating. Question regarding public health, the public health aspects of gun violence. It's my understanding that there's a legal impediment to the CDC collecting data on gun casualties, suicides, murders, accidents, and why not make that available to scientists wanting to research the question?
Because there's a law that says the government will not fund research into gun violence. And that's the problem. I mean, John and I are all quoting 2016 statistics. You got to say, 2016? What's the matter with you guys? You reading old periodicals? We are, because that's how long it takes to put together the story here. Because we do not allow research, government money, to be spent on research on gun violence.
And that was an act of Congress, right, John?
Yes.
Yeah. So, again, call your congressperson if you want some public health research done on the issue of gun violence. Oh, sorry? I'm sorry? Was that it? Oh, I thought John responded. Did you want to
You
respond?
said that was by an act of Congress, right? And
Yeah,
I
yeah.
said yes.
Okay, yeah. Did you have anything else to add?
No.
Okay. One short one? Okay, 1 minute? Okay, I'm sorry, you guys.
Can I add one thing to the Australian? I'd invite anybody to look at the Israeli experience with weapons. They allowed their soldiers for the longest period of time to take their weapons home.
Yes.
After a war. Guess what they've done now? Their suicide rate climbed so much that now they established arms rooms like we do in the United States military. They lock them up. And look at online at some of the articles that have been written about how the gun violence and suicide rate decreased in Israel after they stopped that practice.
Okay, I apologize that we're almost out of time. I wanted to give each of you, I know it went fast. We will be hanging around afterward. We will continue the discussion. If you have a burning question, hang out here. We'll keep talking after this. So about a minute to wrap things up, John, and then Pete.
I think there's 4 things that we want to do, need to do, if we want to get a handle on gun violence in this country, whether it is criminal, whether it is by suicide, whether it is by mass shooting. The first I already mentioned, and that is dramatically increase the penalties on people who steal firearms or who sell them. The second, and this is a long time in coming, we have got to ease confinement standards for the violently mentally ill in this country. There are a lot of people who, for their own good and for the safety of others, should simply be given, in the name of compassion for them, 3 meals a day, ongoing care, not just left to wander the streets at night. I get up in the middle of the night to do my show. I drive through downtown, and it's so tragic. It's so sad seeing people who might not even know where they are or what they're doing, just roaming and staggering. Surely something should be done for these people. The third is that
Briefly.
we need to find practical ways to keep mentally ill people from accessing firearms, and I think it means presidential leadership and from Congress to make it happen. And fourth, suicide prevention measures on a very proactive basis. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John.
No, I would ask you to look at this debate and move up to the 40,000-foot level. Move away from the fringes, as Mark told us to do. Look at it in totality and understand why it is in a country that supposedly is a democracy with leaders elected who are supposed to represent us, that when 92% of Americans feel that we need to do something about this problem, absolutely nothing has been done. That is the real issue we're faced with here. And that's what everybody ought to be asking themselves. Why is it hasn't happened?
All right, big round of applause. General Peter Chiarelli, John Carlson, thanks you guys.